Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it. Huge black clouds seemed to hang over the city with all their might. Thunder rumbled. A terrible thunderstorm was approaching. On the dusty, winding road, limping heavily on her left leg and drenched in sweat, was a woman walking sadly. She looked about 30 years old, very poorly dressed. She wore a long, faded sundress, faded from time, and shabby old sandals. Her long blonde hair had not been washed for a long time, and her braids looked disheveled and untidy. In spite of all this, and the complete absence of any makeup on her face, she had a pleasant, not repulsive appearance. I could see that she had been a beauty in her youth. The woman's name was Diana, and she was not going out on business or visiting, but to the river, with a strong desire not to live anymore. She was so exhausted and devastated by her troubles and hardships that she had no tears left, only a fanatical determination to stop living such a shameful and miserable existence and to fly away to heaven. Diana had very good reasons indeed for such a crazy act. It all began in childhood. Diana was an orphan, abandoned and frozen like a stray, unwanted kitten, thrown out in a back alley. She was picked up by a kind-hearted janitor and taken to the police. And from there, she ended up in a shelter. Diana knew nothing about her parents. The name and last name stone was given to her by the staff of the shelter. Everyone knows that life in the orphanage is not all good, and the girl had to go through a lot. The eternal feeling of hunger, attacks by angry boys, mockery and humiliation by heartless staff, and the feeling that no one needs you on this earth. Diana kept dreaming that a papa and mama would come to her, just like other children, and take her into their family. Adoptive parents often visited them at the orphanage. The other children skillfully took advantage of that. After all, everyone wanted to get into a family and to leave those awful institutional walls. The girls stared into the eyes of the adults, sometimes crying, or on the contrary, throwing themselves into their arm. Most of the time it worked. But Diana did not know how to do it, and she did not want to. On the contrary, she was lost, withdrawn, and not noticed at all. In spite of all this, the little girl studied very well, and she especially liked the exact sciences. She easily multiplied in her head multi-digit numbers and solved complex combinations of equations. Her teachers praised her and advised her to go to university. Diana dreamed of that too, but there was no way. The orphan was not particularly eager to take her on a budget and pay her a social security stipend. After graduation, orphanage girls were legally obligated to be provided with housing. At that time, there was little choice. All the good places in the city had long ago been allocated to the more assertive and pushy ones, leaving only the dwellings in the villages. There was nothing to do. It was necessary to agree. So, Diana became the owner under the social rent contract of a dilapidated house in the village, but on paper it was completely different. When the girl arrived in the village, she could not believe her eyes at once. She even had to double-check the address. In front of her stood a worn house in a long neglected state. Diana sat down with her belongings on the lopsided porch, covered her face with her hands and began to cry, not noticing anything around her. The next 2 days spent in that shack passed like a fog, with only one late-night call from the university admissions office that broke the gloomy atmosphere. She was incredibly lucky. A couple of people failed their exams. Diana miraculously got into the ranking and entered a prestigious university in the capital. The girl was so happy, it seemed that now her life would get better, especially since she had a room in the dormitory, which meant that she would have a place to live. Diana loved her studies. She soaked up every word from the teachers like a sponge, and she never skipped a lecture. In the evenings, the girl spent her time in the library, reading additional literature. So, imperceptibly, 3 courses flew by, but the girls in the room openly laughed at her, considering her a nerd and a nerd behind her back. And then one day, Angela invited Diana to her birthday party. Stop poring over textbooks, you'll miss your youth. Tomorrow we're going to the countryside, to the countryside, to the countryside for barbecue. We're inviting you too, Diana. At least you'll have some fun. By the way, the boys will not be ordinary. Alex, the son of businessmen Panfilova and John, the son of the head of our department, and Oliver, even from the family of the deputy. This is not the snotty classmates who only know how to stare at the chest and drool, but are afraid to go near a girl. Diana hesitated for a long time. But then she couldn't refuse her friend and said yes, it was her birthday after all. She was really tired, and she wanted a little distraction. It was there, on vacation, that Diana met the love of her life. Everyone was having fun and swimming, but Alex just couldn't take his eyes off her. He was literally burning her with his gaze. He paid her beautiful compliments, swam to the other shore for lilies, and handed them not to the birthday girl, but to Diana. He was just crazy about the young, long-legged, busty beauty in the turquoise bathing suit. Diane also really liked this athletic, lean, handsome guy. A stormy and passionate romance arose between them almost immediately. The couple kissed until mind-numbing and couldn't tear themselves away from each other for a second. The kisses made the girl dizzy and her heart raced. The guy tried to go further because he was already experienced in matters of seduction, and he had been in bed with more than one girl before Diane. But no matter how much Alex insisted on intimacy, Diana was adamant. She was simply terrified because Alex was her first man, and how to behave she had no idea. And the girls were teasing, "That's right, Diana. Let him get married first. Otherwise we know the type. He'll fool around and go out into the bush, looking for wind in the field. If you marry Sashka, you'll win the lottery. You won't need anything. So hold your ground to the last." So Diana gave her fiancé a tough ultimatum: intimacy only after the wedding. Soon she graduated, received her coveted diploma, and was easily hired as an accountant at a fairly well-known company, Agat. The salary from the start was quite decent, and Diana began to scrupulously save for a very important purchase: her own apartment. The girl took her duties to heart and sometimes stayed late if something went wrong. Employees were amazed that this little girl, without any calculator on the fly, counted multi-figure rigor and could turn over a lot of documentation for the day. Soon the wedding also took place. The groom could not stand it any longer. He was shaking at the thought of the first wedding night. Although the boy's parents were not happy about his orphan daughter-in-law, who had nothing, only a propiska in some remote village. The mother was indignant and tried to dissuade her son from this rash act. "Alex, son, what do you see in Diana?" "Yeah, she's pretty, she's young, but that's it. No relatives, no wives, nothing. How many of them are there? You've got to be smart. You've got to be forward-thinking. If my father and I could be in business together with another company, think about it. Look at the girls in our circle who have rich daddies." But the boy was adamant. His lust for possession of Diana was literally overwhelming. He was so turned on by her. And he didn't take marriage so seriously. If it happened, he could get a divorce. No big deal. At first, everything was just fine. The honeymoon, the hot and passionate nights, the declarations of love. The couple was inseparable, cooing like lovebirds. Alex worked in his father's firm as a manager. He knew that he would never be kicked out of there and would always turn a blind eye to absenteeism and negligence, so he was not particularly worried. At first, the newlyweds lived with her husband's parents in a huge mansion. But her mother-in-law immediately disliked Diana and was always teasing and trying to pick on her. Every now and then, she tried to sneakily quarrel with the couple. Now she whispered to Alex that supposedly Diana spent a lot of time at work, often late, and that something was wrong. Or she started to talk about why she still does not have grandchildren, and it should be time. She has her career in her head. and you never expect to have children. In general, the atmosphere in the family all the time was very tense. The woman sometimes deliberately stayed at work late so as not to go home. She knew that she was waiting again for a displeased mother. In-laws face. So when Alex suggested they buy a separate apartment together, Diane was all for it. She gave all her savings, and the amount had already accumulated there is considerable, and trusted her husband all the issues associated with the selection, purchase, and registration of the apartment. After all, she simply had no time for that. The fact that he registered it in his own name did not bother Diana at all. What was the big deal? They were family, they trusted each other. What difference did it make who the apartment was registered in her name? And besides, the woman was very young and inexperienced in such matters, and there was absolutely no one to advise her. If she had known then to what in the future would lead to her carelessness, 100 times would have thought. And there it was, the long-awaited housewarming party. The move. Diana so dreamed that now they would finally be able to live happily ever after, without the lectures of her mother-in-law. She began to enthusiastically equip the new family nest. She herself chose curtains and dishes and was happy with every purchase. But it wasn't to be. Alex, having escaped from parental control, went to pieces. He was tired of the boring and monotonous family life with Diana and wanted more drive and excitement. He considered his wife a terrible bore. She had everything on her schedule, and her youth passed away. The man was no longer turned on by the insanity of his wife's caresses. He was fed up with everything. He wanted a new experience, and he looked for it in nightclubs. Rolling home in the morning tipsy and with the scent of women's perfume on his jacket. Diane cried and begged her husband to reconsider, and the couple quarreled frequently. She didn't understand why Alex had changed so much. He became a stranger and cold, as if there was no longer those passionate nights and declarations of love. Moreover, the more she tried to please her husband, the more obnoxious he became. The woman became very nervous and fidgety. At work made unforgivable blunders and mistakes. She understood that their marriage was bursting at the seams, but what to do and how to save it she did not know. And then one day, quite unexpectedly, Alex proposed to her at dinner. I took a trip to a ski resort to a recreation center for the weekend. Why don't we go? Just you and me. We'll relax, go skiing. We've become strangers to each other. We're biting like cats and dogs. Do you mind? Do you mind? Diane jumped for joy and hugged her husband tightly. She had long wanted to rest and relax herself. And then everything did not go well lately. Moreover, the woman had never been to the sea, to say nothing of a ski resort. And here they are on a huge, steep descent. The snow glistened and sparkled, and it was so beautiful. And the air is so clean and fresh it makes your head spin. Diana had never seen such beauty in her life, and stunned as she looked down, the view opened mind-boggling. Slopes and plains, huge firs, covered with snow as if rolled with a huge fur coat, and all white. Alex had been skiing great since childhood, and it wasn't the first time he came here, unlike Diana, who had her skis on for the first time he came here, unlike Diana, who had her ski. She thought the descent was unrealistically high and steep, and the instructor told her not to go down here for the first time. After all, there are beginner's trails, gentle and safe. Why take such a risk? But her husband insisted. Are you a coward, my love? Let's go. It's such a drive. You're always shaking and scared of everything. It's so boring to live like this. Come on, come with me. You love me, don't you? And he drove dashingly downhill, skillfully maneuvering his skis through the snow. It all seemed so easy and simple, and Diana took a chance, trusted her husband, and rode. All she remembered next was the fall and the infernal pain. She rolled downhill for a long time, and darkness in her eyes, and as a result, a compound fracture of her femoral neck. But as it turned out, that was not the end, but only the beginning of her troubles. The woman ended up in the hospital for months. She was not allowed to get up, to walk. She just lay there and stared at the ceiling 24 hours a day. But the worst thing was that Alex came to visit her only once. Dryly asked the doctor about her health and prospects, and having learned that the fracture was very complicated and there was a great risk that the limp would remain for life, just disappeared. He didn't show up a single time. Not only that, he didn't answer the phone. She dialed his number hundreds of times and heard only one thing. The called party's phone is turned off or out of network coverage. Diana was crying and didn't understand anything. How could it be? Couldn't her husband just disappear? 2 months later, she finally walked out of the hospital as if she were in prison, limping badly on her left leg. Fracture had not healed properly. More surgery was needed, but the woman had no money for it. Then something terrible began to happen. She could barely make it home on the bus and started turning the key, but it just wouldn't move in any direction. The woman was cursing and didn't understand a thing. She was so excited to finally get home, take a hot shower, and find out one more time where Alex was. And then the door was opened to her by a complete stranger, an elderly couple. They stared at the stranger in a daze. "My Lochka, what are you doing? By what right are you trying to break into someone else's apartment? We'll call the police." Diana jumped up and down. "I don't understand." "What do you mean, someone else's?" "It's my apartment. I bought it with my husband." "Where's my husband then?" "He and I lived here until I went to the hospital with a fracture." "My husband, Alex. And I'm Diane, his lawfully wedded wife." "So can you tell me what's going on here?" The old lady had gone somewhere and she brought out her documents. "Here, take a look. We recently bought this apartment. The owner was registered alone, Alex. That's right. No one else was registered there. The deal was done properly and notarized, so I'm sorry." "It's fair. Yeah, there's a little something left over from the former owners, some papers. Here you go." We didn't know where to put it. Diana opened the envelope with trembling hands. In it was the divorce certificate. It said in black and white that she and Alex were no longer husband and wife, just to be sure to disassociate themselves from her. It was like some kind of delirium or bad dream. As if in prostration, Diane left the entrance and drove to her workplace, but they wouldn't let her in either. The only thing they gave her was her employment card, with a note in it that she had been fired for truancy. What a twist! Diane tried to explain that her hip had been broken and she had been in the hospital and she had her sick leave and her husband had to report everything, but they would not listen to her. They said it was too late and that she had been replaced by a new employee. That's all. The woman desperately rushed to Alex's parents, to the mansion. She wanted to find out the truth no matter what, and to find out where her husband had disappeared to. There had to be some explanation for all this horror. She couldn't make sense of everything that was happening. Her brain just couldn't handle it all. But her mother-in-law only answered her through the intercom. "Get out of here, you beggar. Alex's apartment was Alex's, and he had every right to sell it, and now he's living with another woman. And she, unlike you, has status and a rich dowry. I hope they get married soon. What did you want? Or do you think he should suffer the rest of his life with an orphan, with a limp and childless? Marriage to you was a big mistake from the beginning, and I've told him 100 times. Don't come here again, or I'll call the police. Is that clear? You're nothing to him anymore, and you have nothing to him anymore, and you have nothing to do with our family." Diana shouted out in anger. "What bastards you all are! I hate you! At least give me back my things." "Where did you put them?" My mother-in-law replied caustically. "They were bought with Alexander's money. But all right. The guard will bring you something." Diana freaked out. "Do you think I didn't work anywhere? My salary may have been less, but I was investing money in my family just the same." "How could you do that?" 5 minutes later, the guard threw a small bag of belongings in her face and pushed her roughly. "You were told to go away. The mistress is nervous. She told me to get you out of here. Go in good health." Diana waved her hand and wandered away, limping badly. There was nothing to do. She had to buy a ticket and go to her home country, to her god. Forsaken village. For the road she gave the last kopecks she had in her purse. There was no more money at all. Diana was shaking in a stuffy, dusty bus and hoped that at least she could live in that shabby house for a while, and then we'd see. But when she saw the pile of charred heads where the house had burned down, she just sat down on the ground and burst into tears. Everything inside was bubbling and raging. The hatred, anger, and resentment was overwhelming her. Why? Why did he do this to me? What have I done to him? I loved him, truly, truly. Bastard, you bastard, you bastard. He took me for a ride. He left him without a roof over his head. And he went to his mistress. It turns out that he used me as a beautiful toy. And when he realized that I was bored and even limping, threw me out of his life as unnecessary trash. Where to go now? What to do? The woman got up and staggered back to the station. 3 kilometers on foot. She could not go anywhere. She had no money, no clothes either. She looked in her bag. There were only a couple of sweaters and jeans and 1 jacket. That was all she had earned and acquired over the years of marriage. All she had was her papers. For another month she wandered around, sleeping at the train station, trying to beg. But she was hardly ever served, since Diana was terribly ashamed to do so. The woman did not know how to beg. To press pity, she just stood there with her head down, and that was it. Not only that, but many people shamed her too. "A young girl," they said, "and you were begging, shame on you." Diana would wait for someone to leave a half-eaten bun or pie at the sidewalk cafe, and she would grab it greedily, choking on it and drinking the rest of the tea. She was disgusted by the smell of her long, unwashed body, her face covered with a thick layer of dirt and dust. And then Diana couldn't stand it. "Rather than live like this, I'd rather drown myself. To hell with everything. What's the point in continuing this miserable existence? I'm turning into an animal." With these thoughts in mind, the woman waddled to the bridge and hung over the railing. She took a deep breath, took one last look at the black and menacing sky, gathered her courage, and threw one leg over for the jump. Suddenly, an expensive car pulled up behind her. Behind the wheel sat a nice, well-groomed man in his 50s, looking at her dumbfounded. Then he shouted out, "Hey, what are you doing? You're going to fall, aren't you? You'll drown. It's a fast current." Diana only waved her hand. "And I want to drown. I don't want to suffer anymore, okay? What business is it of yours? Don't interfere." And she had already thrown the other leg over and was balancing on her hands only. The man quickly ran out of the car and picked up the light as a feather, gaunt woman. He looked at her intently and offered, "You know what? Since you don't want to live anyway, I have a business proposition for you. Come work for me as a laundress for a couple of months. Because my employee went on maternity leave, I couldn't find anyone to replace her. I'll let you live there in the back room. And then go drown yourself. I'll pay you without cheating." "What have you got to lose?" Diana sniffed her nose and thought to herself, "I really have nothing to lose. I'll take it. It can't get any worse than this." And she said yes. The stranger's name was Dexter, and he turned out to be a pleasant man and a good conversationalist. The man was expensively dressed, well groomed, and apparently wore a wig. He listened silently and attentively to Diana's story of how her husband had robbed her, and only shook his head. He put her in the back room. There was no window, but there was a table, a chair, and a couch. He even gave her bedding, a towel, and everything she needed. He let her take a shower for the employees. He gave her tea and cookies and said, "You know, Diana, don't rush to the next world. Sometimes problems solve themselves without our desire or involvement. So just work for now, and then we'll see." The woman was immensely grateful to Dexter for his kindness and understanding. That night she must have spent an hour under the shower, washing all the dirt off herself, and for the first time since leaving the hospital, she slept soundly. The hard couch felt like a soft feather bed. Diane approached her work with full responsibility. She worked to her heart's content, and she quickly got the hang of it. Of course, she was hurt that she, an accountant by profession, was now just a laundress. But it was better than wandering and starving at the station. The staff laughed softly at the lame beggar living in the back room, but they did not openly insult her. They felt sorry for her. It was a sin to make fun of an invalid. One day, a respectable man came into the laundry room. He was expensively and tastefully dressed, and he came in a fancy foreign car, but something about his eyes was not good. They ran back and forth like a criminal's. He turned to Diane. "I need to get this jacket in order." Here, I managed to knock over a jar of raspberry jam at breakfast. "If you need it, you can have it dry, cleaned." "I'll pay for it." Diane felt cold. She knew perfectly well that the jacket was simply bloody, and it was no jam. But she didn't let it show and silently accepted the order. Mechanically, she wrote down the visitor's car number on a piece of paper, and she did not know why, just in case. Before sending the item to the dry cleaner, according to the instructions, all pockets should be inspected. And so Diane did. And suddenly, in the front breast pocket, she found a note. On a crumpled piece of paper, she read, "Help. I'm being held in an abandoned house with a green roof near the aquarium store." And that was it. No first name, no last name, and no coordinates of any kind. Diana began to remember, and sure enough, there was such a store, not far from their laundry, and there was an abandoned house there, too. So, it's not someone's stupid joke, and the jacket is certainly not jam. It's very serious. Someone is in trouble and begging for help. What should I do? Should I go and see? I don't know. What if there are bandits? Should I call the police? What would I tell them? That I found a piece of newspaper with a note on it. They will obviously laugh at me. For the rest of the shift, Diane was tormented by doubts, and yet she decided to go and see for herself that this was no one's stupid joke. She walked around the perimeter of the house. It was abandoned, the front door locked with a big rusty padlock. It was as if no one had come near the house in a long time, if it weren't for the fresh tread marks from the car. And it was obvious that someone had driven up to the house more than once. The woman stood on tiptoe and tried to peep through the window that had not been washed for a long time. Suddenly, to her horror, she saw a man in the far corner of the cluttered room. He was sitting on the floor, with his head hung on his chest, and seemed to show no signs of life at all. Diana was horrified. "Is it too late?" "Oh, shall we do now?" She began to knock softly at the window, trying to get the man's attention. Then louder and louder. To her happiness and relief, he heard the knocking, opened his eyes, and tried to approach the window, moving with the last of his strength. The man was badly beaten. There was literally not a living spot on him. Crimson stains caked on his arms and head, and there were fresh bruises and abrasions. His face was so swollen it looked more like a hideous mask. He slowly, gesturing and whispering with his lips, tried to explain everything to Diana. She understood as follows. "I was kidnapped. For ransom. My father is a rich businessman. This house belongs to a bandit. He works for criminals, so greedy he even took my bloody jacket. Greedy, he even took my bloody jacket. Greedy, he plays cards. Save me, I beg you." Diana nodded her head, and immediately, so that he could see, called the police station, explained long and confusedly who she was and what she wanted. They seemed to believe her. The woman did not run away. She waited for the patrol to arrive and the prisoner to be released. As the poor beaten prisoner was being taken on a gurney to the hospital, he whispered to her, "My name is David. Thank you. I will never forget you." Tears welled up in his eyes, and the woman almost cried too, waving her hand at him and shouting in her wake, "And I'm Diana. Everything will be all right. All night long, the woman scrambled. She couldn't sleep for a second, still thinking about the incident. David's brown, pleading eyes lingered in her mind. Something had caught her by this poor stranger, had struck a chord in her soul. The day after her shift, Diane took a shower, let her hair down for the first time, bought bananas and tangerines with her last money, and went to see David at the hospital. At first they didn't want to let her in because the man was in intensive care in a serious condition. But then they took pity on the lame, sad woman and allowed them to see each other. Diana was horrified when she saw David tangled in wires and sensors. His eyes were ajar. He saw her and tried to smile. The woman waved a hand at him and sat down next to him in a chair. She didn't know what to say. She just sat there, stroked his arm, and whispered softly, "You know, it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. A man told me that sometimes grief goes away and the problem solves itself, almost without your involvement, and now I believe it. Get your strength back and I'll come back tomorrow, okay?" The man's eyes moistened, and he nodded weakly. And so Diana began to go to him as if she were going to work. The staff got used to her and stopped cursing. David's father, on the other hand, came to him very rarely, and only for 5 minutes. He would dryly ask how his health was and then leave, citing his busy schedule. Diana did not understand how it was possible. Her son had miraculously survived, escaped from the clutches of the villains, and his father did not care. When David was transferred to a regular room, he decided to have a frank conversation with Diana. After all, this strange, pretty, and very sad woman was, in fact, the closest person to him now, and the man wanted very much to share with someone what he had been feeling for so many years. David sighed heavily and began to tell the story. "You see, I'm not my father's. Adopted. That's why he wasn't in a hurry to ransom me. They say my birth parents are dead, and this man took custody. On top of that, he got his hands on all my parents' assets. He was kind of their partner. That's how he became my father. I don't remember my parents at all, and I've never even seen a picture of them. For some reason, they were nowhere to be found either. Strangely enough, the perpetrators of my parents' death were never found, and the people who ordered the crime of kidnapping me have still not been found. How come? Because you gave the police the number of the car in which the perpetrator had delivered my blood, stain jacket, and we made a composite sketch together. Something's not right here. I can feel it. My father's not happy that I survived. I can see it in his eyes. I'm like a bone in his throat. Ever since we were kids, our relationship has been chilly. He often looked at me so strangely. I do not even know how to say it. I even got a chill on the skin. I never felt any affection or warmth from him. I was very offended when I was little, and then I got used to it. I never told anyone about it, but I trusted you for some reason. And now, when I graduated from university and began to infiltrate the affairs of the corporation and business, our relationship completely fell apart." Diane replied, "Now I understand why he visits you so infrequently, and you talk so dryly. Yeah, that happens too. I'm sorry. At least you have a father like that. Even if he's adopted, I grew up in an orphanage. I was born as a stray puppy and thrown out to die. And then my husband did exactly the same. While I was in hospital with a fracture, he robbed me of my apartment, sold it, and left me for his mistress. He was also asked out of work retroactively, and the old house was set on fire by some hooligan. That's how, in one fell swoop, I became a bum and lame beggar. And I was a married lady and an accountant at Lotus. I wanted to drown myself, but the laundry owner took pity on me and gave me a job. Yeah, it's a real shame. But what can I do? So you and I are alike. Both of us are not very happy." David grabbed Diana's hand and responded eagerly, "Have patience a little longer, my good man. I'll get back on my feet, deal with my problems, and I'll definitely help you. You will not work as a laundress and live in the back room, I promise you. A woman like you deserves more." They said a warm goodbye But Diana continued to visit David in the hospital until he was discharged. They became very close during this time. It even seemed to her that there was a special warmth and connection between them, something more than just friendship. But she repelled such thoughts so that she might not dream of unrealistic dreams in vain. The woman said to herself, "Wake up. You limp beggar, you have nothing. Why would a businessman like David need you? It's impossible. You've had enough of these rich people. You've had enough of these rich people. You've had enough of their grief. They're all soft at first, but then they stick a knife in your back." But why does he hold her hand so warmly, so sincerely and penetratingly looks into her eyes? Why does he say the words, "my good one"? He could have just called her by her name. But no matter how much the woman struggled with herself, just the thought of David made her heart start pounding like crazy, and the stupid smile wouldn't come off her face. Another month passed. David and Diana continued to meet in secret. They walked along the riverbank, watched the sunset, held hands gently, but nothing more than that. David did not allow himself anything unnecessary for Diana. Every such meeting was like a holiday, like an outlet. She knew that David's father was against their strange rendezvous, and that the laundry workers laughed at her. But she didn't care. Her soul begged for these meetings. She was filled with warmth and tenderness, and she thawed out little by little after her husband's betrayal. And David himself could not understand why he was so attracted, like a magnet, to this strange-looking Diana. Amazingly, when they met, he felt so good and relaxed, he didn't even notice her limp. Their souls were drawn to each other against their wills and desires. He really wanted to help Diana. It was easy for a well-to-do man to rent her an apartment and get her a normal job. The problem was something else. Until he got to the bottom of the truth and exposed the villains, David was afraid to bring Diana close to him, lest he expose her to danger. All this time, Diana felt as if her back was following her. Just turn around. No one but her intuition had never failed her, and she was sure someone was following her. For some reason, she sinned that it was David's father who had hired some to follow them, but she felt very uncomfortable, a chill running down her spine. When she shared this with David, he agreed too. "You know, I've noticed that too. Yesterday, for example, at the gas station, I felt someone staring at me. I turned around, only my hat flashed, and the man managed to escape. I thought I imagined it, but now I realize that it wasn't. What the hell?" One evening, Diane was blissfully resting after a hard shift, rubbing her aching sore leg. Suddenly there was a quick and insistent knock on the door of her closet. The surprised woman went to open it, thinking it was a security guard or someone from the staff, just in case. But standing on the doorstep was an older, burly man wearing a cap pulled down over his eyes and a hood that hid half of his face. He spoke softly and quickly. "Are you Diane? May I come in? I'm risking my life climbing onto private property. I won't take up much of your time. I have something very important to tell you." Diana silently stepped back and let the stranger pass, though she was very anxious to know what he had in mind. The man sat down on the couch and began to speak quickly and confusedly. "Please listen to me carefully. I am the real father of your boy, David. My name is Victor. I was the original owner of the corporation. I started at the bottom, everything by myself. My wife helped me a lot, and gradually the business began to expand and grow. And when I couldn't cope with all the responsibilities, I was advised to take a good companion to help me. Justin himself came to me, very much asked for work. At first I really liked him. He was a smart, savvy guy. He was my right-hand man for many years. Over time, I began to trust him so much that I signed all the papers without looking, for which I soon paid dearly. Many years ago, it was not me, but my personal driver and spouse who were killed in an accident. They said the brakes were faulty, although my driver could not have allowed that to happen. Adrian was so meticulous that he double-checked everything 100 times before he drove off, and watched the car carefully. It wasn't until later that I realized who had done it. The partner, Justin, wanted to take over my business. I went to him a couple of days later, and he turned me in to the police. He had a killer dirt on me. He cooked it up in a way that could not be distorted, with tax evasion and blatant violations of the law. As a result, they gave me 20 years in strict regime. Several times, they wanted to kill me in prison, but I survived. When they put me in jail, my son was 2 years old. David doesn't remember me at all. My partner lied to him that I died in that accident. That's what a lot of people in town thought. He even destroyed my photos and set up a gravestone. That's the story in a nutshell. And recently, I got out of juvie. The businessman companion is nowhere to be found. He doesn't know anything yet. I was just about to tell my son, but I didn't have time. Started following you. Diane, help me see David. I need to talk to him and warn him, because Justin is a scary man. He won't let David take over the corporation, and he'll do anything to get rid of him. I've been through enough at the hands of that scoundrel. I can't have my son's life ruined. Diana was shocked. What a twist. She shook her head and promised that she would arrange to meet them by the river the day after tomorrow. She and David were going on another date. The visitor sincerely thanked the woman and disappeared as quietly as he had come, as if he had vanished. For 3 days, Diana had been worried she had not known how to tell David that not only she, but also her own father, would be waiting for him at the agreed place. After all, he thought he was dead, and there was no telling how he would take the news. David stomped in place, holding a bouquet of delicate daisies. Diana adored them and was always glad when he gave them to her. Well, where is she? Is something late? Did something happen? The boy worried. He missed Diana very much and wanted to see her as soon as possible. At last, the familiar figure appeared in the distance. Loose curls waved in the wind, and a delicate chintz dress in small polka dots galloped upward, and Diana kept pulling it up in a funny way. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were shining. Even her limpness did not spoil her at all. David was in awe of her, looking at her. They kissed each other amicably on the cheek. And Diana said excitedly, "David, we have a difficult date today. There is a man who wants to talk to you very much. He's the one who's been following me and you lately. But there's a good reason for that. Don't worry, but your own father is alive. He didn't die in the accident. It was your stepfather who set it up. Well, your dad can tell you himself. Shall we go?" David was dumbfounded. He stood still as if he was standing there, not knowing whether it could be true or not. After all, he had thought his father was dead all his life, and then he suddenly came back to life. And then Viktor Chernyshov came out of the bushes to meet him. He timidly approached David, looked him sincerely and warmly in the eyes, and said, "Hello, my son. We meet at last. Can I give you a hug? I've been dreaming about it for so many years. You were only 2 years old when they locked me up. I still remember you as a cheeky, rosy-cheeky little brat. And now look at you, a real man." David stared into his eyes and realized that it was true. After all, he looked very much like this man. The same eyebrows, the same look, the way he threw his head back. There could be no doubt about it. It was obvious that life had shaken Victor quite a bit, but nevertheless the resemblance was strong. When they sincerely embraced, David felt such warmth inside, probably for the first time in his life, the same warmth that he'd been missing all his childhood. He wiped away a tear that had come up from too much emotion and began to ask him about everything. "How glad I am, Daddy, that you have been found, that you are alive. But how did it happen? Justin had been telling me since I was a kid that you and Mom died in the accident. I didn't even have any pictures of you. There's a monument in the cemetery. That's all. If you're alive, why are you looking for me now? Where have you been all this time? I don't understand. You've wasted so much time. We could have talked. Victor grinned sadly and sat down on the edge of the shore. Everything went wrong that day. My wife and I had an urgent business trip, and I was supposed to be the one in that car. But as fate would have it, I got a phone call and had to stay home late. So I put the driver behind the wheel. And when I heard about the terrible tragedy and that all the channels were reporting my death, I decided to hide. I knew at once there was something wrong. I went to him because I trusted him unconditionally, and he sent me to jail for 20 years. He had fabricated incriminating evidence against me. He was preparing it for a long time. That's how my closest man and companion stabbed me in the back. That's how I ended up behind bars. They tried to get me there more than once. Here, look, there's a scar. But by some miracle I survived, and I got out recently. I thought I'd come looking for you, so I followed you and Diana, and I'm sorry. I don't want anything from you, son. I just want to warn you, don't trust him. He's a scary man. He'll set you up. I don't want him to ruin your life too. But the bastard doesn't even know I'm alive. Not only that, I have documents hidden in a safe place that prove that I am the owner of the entire corporation. And Justin is just my companion, but I don't know how to get to him. David was indignant, shaking with anger. That bastard! That bastard! Look at the way you set it up. He put you in jail and kept your company. And now he's trying to take me out. I'm sure he had something to do with the kidnapping. He took his time with the ransom, and he obviously wasn't happy to save me. That's all right. I'll make him dance. I'll get him out in the open. We'll arrange a meeting for you and right at our house. And you take all the documents. That's how we'll nail the scoundrel. Father and son developed a whole plan of revenge, because evil should not go unpunished. After her father left, Diana and David walked along the riverbank for a long time, discussing the incredible encounter with her father. It got chilly and Diana shivered. Then David suddenly turned her abruptly toward him, hugged her gently, and whispered, "Frozen, my good man. Come, I'll warm you up." And for the first time he kissed her not friendly on the cheek, but passionately and frantically and frantically. Diane was immediately dizzy, and the ground just fell out from under her feet. They loved each other until dawn. They made a fire and enjoyed each other. When Angela was already there, Diana suddenly woke up and came to her senses. She began frantically searching for her clothes. "Oh, what am I doing? I have to go to work soon. We have to hurry. David, I'm so ashamed." Now you'll think I'm a backyard girl, just like that, giving myself ashore. But I don't regret it, and I'll remember it as the best night of my life. The man shook his head, shaking off the remnants of sleep, picked Diana up in his arms and covered her mouth with a kiss. "You're stupid, okay? I'm not letting you go anywhere else, and don't you get your hopes up. I don't care what anyone thinks, what they see. I love you, Diane, and I don't want any other woman, okay? You don't work in the laundry anymore. I'll talk to the owner. I'll take you to my apartment downtown. And when I finish with Adrian, you and me, my little star, will get married, and we'll live in a mansion." Diane breathed a sigh of relief and even cried with happiness. She could not believe that her life had made sense again and had turned into color. David took her to a wonderful, spacious apartment and told her to settle in for the time being. He gave her a bank card with a lot of money on it. He told her not to be shy and to buy whatever she needed. They said a warm goodbye, and the man went to put his revenge plan into action. When he arrived at the corporation, the first thing he did was take care of current affairs, and then casually dropped his foster father after the meeting. "I invited a businessman to dinner with us tonight. He's a newcomer to our city, and he really wants to cooperate with us. I'd like you to meet him. Do you mind?" Justin shifted his shoulders. "Why not?" "If it's a really profitable partner, we can have dinner. Bring me, of course, I don't mind." And so it was evening. David was shaking and pounding inside, but outwardly he did not show it. Anna, the cook, had laid a fancy table. Justin put on a matching suit and waited for the visitor. Finally, the doorbell rang. Victor came into the living room. Yes, he was older, and his hair was graying, but he looked all right. David had taken care of his appearance beforehand, so the man was also dressed to the highest standard and was holding a solid leather briefcase. Justin was taken aback and at a loss for words. The former companions silently and intently stared into each other's eyes as if in a duel. Without blinking, Victor began first. "Hello, Judas. How are you living on my money? I see you're doing all right. You didn't expect me to live, so it was a surprise. You sent thugs to my prison twice, and they almost sent me to that angel. What do you think I should do now? Watch you lie to my son for years. Lie to him that I'm dead, knowing full well that I'm behind bars." Justin began to twist and turn, realizing that he had nothing to defend. "Listen, Victor. Let's not get hot, shall we? He who remembers the old days is a man in the wrong. Let's split the capital in half and go our separate ways. Do you agree?" Victor laughed right in his face. "No way. Now I've got all the proof I need that this is just my business. I'll go to all the authorities and I'll prove it. And you, my dear fellow, you'll have to be in my shoes. You'll see what it's like in prison." Justin went pale, covered in sweat, and clutched at his heart. David called the police and an ambulance at the same time. Everything that was happening made his head spin. Could it really be true that for so many years he had called the man who had essentially murdered his parents as a father, mutilated several lives at once? It was hard to comprehend. In the meantime, Diane was hard at work. She cleaned the apartment, cooked a delicious dinner, and decided to tidy up a bit so as not to look like a pauper, especially since David had allowed her to spend her money without limits. With a sinking heart, she entered the salon. It smelled so pleasantly of expensive, exquisite creams and perfumes. In the armchairs behind screens, the ladies were seated for various procedures, and judging by the high-priced handbags left on the hanger, she could imagine how much everything cost here. The flamboyant girl at the reception looked appreciatively at the lame tramp in a faded-from-time-wash dress and grimaced, then reluctantly asked, "Do you happen to be at the wrong door? We have a decent place here?" Diane became very hurt and embarrassed, and she spoke softly. "I just wanted to get a new haircut. And a manicure, too. Don't think about it, I have money." The girl smirked sarcastically. "Have you even seen our rates? Businessmen's wives come to us. They're no match for you. A social shelter for the crippled across the street, that's where you are." Diane suddenly burst into tears and ran out of the cabin, limping badly. She wandered without knowing the road, sobbing her eyes out. David rushed to the apartment in the evening and shouted joyfully from the threshold, "I'm home, honey. How are you, my dear? Are you settling in? I'm going to tell you something. You can't imagine what happened today. My father and I brought the scoundrel out in the open. A man couldn't wait to share such important events with his beloved, but no one answered him. David was very surprised and went into the kitchen. The stove smelled intoxicatingly of cabbage soup. On the table there was a baked pie, carefully covered with a napkin. But Diana was nowhere to be found. The man rushed from room to room in a panic, not understanding what could have happened during the day and where had the bride disappeared to. And then he noticed a note in the hallway. There were only a few lines. "I love you very much, David, but we can't be together. I don't want to embarrass you. I'm a lame beggar and you're a tough businessman. We're not the same. I'd rather die than be mocked all my life. Forgive me for everything." The man even felt sick. The blood rushed to his head. He frantically tried to figure out where to look for Diana now. After all, he knew for sure that he did not need anyone but her. David rushed to the laundry room. The director was just there. The man told him everything, thinking that maybe Diana was hiding from him here. She had, in fact, nowhere else to go. Dexter was so worried that he even took off his wig and kept blotting his wet, bald head with a handkerchief. Go to the bridge, to the river at once. I'm sure she's there. When I first met her, Diana had just tried to jump off the bridge and drown herself. I'm afraid she's decided to finish the job now. You mustn't think she's crazy. She is a very good woman, but she has had a hard and crippled fate. She has a limp, too. It seems that someone has offended, and that's what she thought to herself. Twisted. She needs to learn to accept herself as she is. David wouldn't listen and rushed to the designated place. He flew as fast as he could and was afraid he would be too late. Indeed, he saw Diana from a distance. She was standing, leaning against the railing, looking down intensely, as if she were gathering her thoughts. The man ran up behind her, yanked her away from the edge of the fence, turned her around to face him, and began shaking her like a rag doll. "You're out of your mind! What if you'd really jumped off and drowned? Diana, are you crazy? What kind of idiotic tricks are you pulling? You're a grown man." The woman became hysterical and started pushing David away and pounding his chest with her fists. "So be it. What do you need me for? Everyone will mock you and pity you for messing with a cripple. I went to the salon today. Just wanted to please you and get a new hair and manicure. I was told that lame beggars like me didn't belong there, and simply pointed to the door. So what's the point of going on living? Tell me, you're only with me out of pity, aren't you?" David understood everything, took her in his arms, held her close to him, and began to calm her like a small child. "What a fool you are. You're in my heart, in my soul, you know. And I don't give a damn about your limp. I do not notice it at all. If you want to know, I love you and I want you to be my wife. Is this only offered out of pity? Please, let's go home and don't ever do that again, okay? I almost lost my mind when I didn't find you home." Diana felt so good and warm from these words. She believed that David really loved her, and these were not empty words. She wiped away her tears and answered, "Please forgive me. It's just that I love you so much, but I was afraid you didn't need me. I promise I'll learn to live with it and not react to ridicule. The important thing is I have you, and you have me." Then there was a delicious dinner, long, intimate conversations, and a sea of love. As she listened to David's measured breathing in the morning, Diana was perfectly happy. Now she herself seemed such a fool of yesterday's reckless impulse. I don't care about all those arrogant chickens. Let them watch and be jealous that a man like David fell in love with her. With that thought, the woman finally fell into a serene and sweet sleep. After the scoundrel was apprehended, and, after checks and proceedings, he got what he deserved, David, Diana, and Victor moved into the mansion and decided to live together in their family heirloom. Diana gladly became its mistress. She kept order, fed the men delicious dinners, and looked forward to seeing David home in the evening. The man with Diana on his arm walked proudly through the expensive salons, dressed as beauty with the latest clothes. Now the girls were not rude to her, but were ingratiatingly looking into her eyes and trying to please her. Diana was very changed. She was unrecognizable. Beautiful, well-groomed hair flowed like a waterfall over her shoulders, stylish clothes, and gentle manicure. Salon care did its job. The woman looked just chic, and the massage sessions helped her to work out her ligaments, and she became much less lame. And soon, to everyone's joy, Diana realized she was pregnant. She couldn't believe it, since she had long considered herself childless. Victor has also changed a lot. He was no longer a worn-out former convict, but a businessman, an active man again. He plunged into his element with redoubled zeal, spent days and nights at the corporation, trying to make up for all the things he had missed out on in so many years. He and his son were very close, literally on the same page, communicating a lot now, consulting with each other. David spoke the word daddy with such reverence every time now, for it now carried a completely different meaning. Ever since childhood, the man had missed his father's support, praise, approval. Due to the pregnancy of Diana, the couple decided not to drag out the wedding. It was just great. David did not like excessive hype around his person, so he invited only the closest and most loyal friends and employees to the celebration. On the bride's side, there was only one guest, Dexter and his family. The woman was insanely grateful to him for saving her from imminent death at the time, giving her shelter and a job. After all, he was the only one who had given her a helping hand in her time of need. The man was also sincerely happy for Diana and wished the best for the newlyweds. In the midst of the fun, Diana came up to him and said, "You were right. Sometimes everything in life works itself out. You just have to keep your hands up, don't get discouraged, and just wait." Diana's pregnancy was surprisingly easy, with no toxicosis or complications. And soon a charming little girl, Sophia, was born. David did not dote on his beautiful girl because she was a copy of him, except for her eyes, like Diana's, huge and gray. One day, on an ordinary day off, the family was taking a leisurely stroll in the park. The weather was beautiful, everything around was in bloom and fragrance, and the first green leaves were appearing on the trees. The couple was walking peacefully on the arm, cooing about something. David proudly wheeled a stroller with his daughter. Suddenly, Sonachka whimpered and began to whirl. Diane immediately took her daughter in her arms. She and her husband sat down on the bench and began to have fun together, and it took with the baby. The picture was simply heartwarming, and only one of the movers, who was unloading the boxes of drinks brought to the store nearby, gritted his teeth and missed the box on his foot. The drunken, shabby man howled in pain, but still couldn't take his eyes off the very couple. He could not help but recognize Diana, for she had not changed at all. On the contrary, she was even more handsome and refreshed. And most importantly, it was obvious that she was perfectly happy. Here her husband put the child back in the stroller, gently embraced and kissed Diana, and they leisurely went for a walk on. And the trucker opened a bottle of beer with shaking hands and greedily drank it straight from his throat. It was hard to recognize the formerly famous businessman Alex in this down and out man. Life had thanked him in full for all the meanness and nastiness he had done to Diana. Mistress, for whom he exchanged his wife, an orphan, robbed him blind as she worked for the competition. She gave them all the information about the company, and they made sure that Alex was left with nothing. His parents passed away after a serious illness. All his friends and former partners turned their backs on him at once. Who needs a loser without a penny in his pocket? With grief, Alex began to drink. At first, he thought he could stop at any time, but it turned out he could stop at any time, but it turned out he could not. Now, he dragged out a miserable existence, worked as a longshoreman here and there, and rented a corner of the dormitory. When Alex saw Diane, so beautiful and happy with a baby in his arms, suddenly everything turned over in his soul. He only now, at that very moment, realized what a woman he had lost, how he had crippled her fate for nothing. And she was probably the only one who loved him sincerely and truly. He was biting his elbows and tearing at his hair, knowing that he could not go back, and that all that had happened to him, in fact, pay back for his actions. There is a saying for a reason: what we have, we don't keep, and when we lose, we cry. David wrapped his Diana in such care and love, like a warm plaid, that the woman sometimes felt that all the horrors that had once happened to her were in some other parallel life that did not belong to her at all. For it was only with David and Sophia that she found the true happiness of womanhood that she had never dared to dream of before.